In a single decade, I convinced my own body to shut down, all because I was too proud to admit I was addicted to a blue can. For 10 years, I didn't just drink energy drinks, I lived inside them. I built a life where the only thing that tasted like hydration was a can of Monster Energy Zero. I was 30 years old, standing in the doorway of my own health crisis, and I had spent a decade gaslighting myself into believing I was immune to the very thing that was slowly killing me. It started innocently enough, or at least it felt that way at the time. I was 20, fresh out of the gate of college, trying to navigate the foggy transition into adulthood. I needed energy, I needed focus. I needed to stay awake for those long nights of work and gaming that seemed to stretch into infinity. So I reached for the blue can, just one or two a day, a morning pick-me-up, an afternoon boost. It was a ritual, a small, manageable habit. But habits, like vines, have a way of wrapping around your throat until you can't breathe without them. By the time I hit my late 20s, the one or two cans had spiraled. It became a minimum of 4, sometimes 5, every single day, morning, noon, and night. I drank them like water, but I didn't drink water. I stopped drinking water. I didn't even have water in my vocabulary anymore. My body, my mind, my entire existence became conditioned to the sound of that can cracking open, the hiss of carbonation, the ice-cold liquid hitting the back of my throat. I remember the exact moment I realized how deep the rabbit hole went. I would sit down at my computer, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes, and the first thing I needed wasn't a stretch or a deep breath or a glass of fresh water. I needed the fridge. I needed that specific blue can. If it wasn't there, I couldn't work. I couldn't game. I couldn't function. It was a Pavlovian response, a biological trigger I had engineered over a decade of repetition. And here is where the gaslighting began. This is the part where I played the villain in my own story, convincing myself that I was the hero, or at least, a genius who had evolved beyond human limitations. I told myself I was caffeine immune. It was a lie I told myself so often, so consistently, that it became my reality. I reasoned that because I could drink a Monster at 11:00 p.m. and still fall asleep, my body must have built a tolerance so high that the caffeine was neutralized. I ignored the science. I ignored the common sense that every nutritionist and doctor in existence would have screamed at me. I didn't want to give up the ritual. I didn't want to admit that I was dependent. So I told myself I was immune. But the body doesn't lie, even if the mind does. For 10 years, I dragged myself through life feeling like a zombie. I felt chronically flat, exhausted, as if I were wading through wet concrete. I was pumping my system full of stimulants, yet I was more tired than I had ever been. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. I was ashen. My skin was incredibly pale, drained of color, looking as though I hadn't seen the sun in a decade. My eye circles were dark, deep bruises under my eyes that had been there since 2014, or so it felt. I looked like I hadn't slept in a decade, and in a way, I hadn't. I tried to lose weight, but my body refused to cooperate. I was in a massive calorie deficit, eating less than I should, yet the scale didn't move. My metabolism was stuck in a permanent error state, a broken engine running on the wrong fuel. I would get random heart palpitations, a racing pulse that would thump against my ribs while I was just sitting still, doing absolutely nothing. I knew it was the caffeine. I knew it was the dehydration, but I ignored it. I pushed it down, buried it under the layers of my own denial, and convinced myself it was just part of the process. I was a walking contradiction. I was drinking a substance designed to dehydrate you in order to stay hydrated. I was consuming a stimulant to fix my fatigue, which only made my fatigue worse by disrupting my sleep cycles and stressing my heart. And the worst part, I was doing it all to protect a habit. The turning point came 2 months ago. I was researching my dark eye circles, digging through forums and medical articles, looking for a cure for the exhaustion that had become my default state. And then, it clicked. The puzzle pieces fell into place with a violence that made my head spin. I wasn't immune. I had never been immune. I was just heavily conditioned. I was dangerously dehydrated. I was stressed to the point of collapse. The concept of hydration and the dangers of high caffeine levels were things I had pushed out of my mind for 10 years just to protect my habit. I had manipulated my own brain to create a narrative where I was special, where I was different, where I had conquered the caffeine. But the truth was much simpler and much more embarrassing. I was just a moron. I finally cut back. It wasn't an overnight miracle, but it was a beginning. I now limit myself to a maximum of 2 cans a day, and I never, ever drink one after 3:00 p.m. Everything else is water. Real, plain water, sometimes with a squeeze of lemon. It sounds so simple. It sounds like something a child could do. But for me, it is a struggle. It is still quite hard for me to stay away from the monster. When I am thirsty, when I am tired, when I am bored, the craving is there. That blue can has a taste I like, a specific sweetness that the water just doesn't provide. It's a flavor that has become a part of my identity, and sadly, there are no caffeine variants available that taste quite the same. It is honestly fascinating and deeply embarrassing to look back at how much we can manipulate ourselves just to keep an addiction going. We rewrite our history, we invent new realities, we tell ourselves stories of immunity and resilience to avoid the hard truth that we are slaves to a chemical. I am sharing this now as a final closing chapter for myself. It is a way of saying, I was wrong, I was stupid, but I am waking up. I hope that by sharing this, I can serve as a warning to someone else who might be in the same boat. Maybe you think you're immune too. Maybe you think you can handle just one more can or two or five. Maybe you think you're just tired and you don't realize you're actually dehydrated or that your heart is racing for a reason you're too afraid to name. You are not immune, you are just conditioned. And the only way to break the cycle is to admit that you are not special, that you are just human, and that you need to drink water. I'm 30 years old. I've spent a decade turning myself into a pale, exhausted zombie with a racing heart, all because I was too proud to admit I was addicted to a blue can. But I'm waking up, and if I can do it, so can you. So here is the question I want you to ask yourself, the one that keeps me up at night. If you had been drinking the same thing every day for 10 years, convinced you were immune, but your body was screaming for help, when would you finally listen? Would you wait until you were 30? Would you wait until your skin turned pale and your heart started racing? Or would you stop right now? What would you do? Drop it in the comments. Let's see if we can break the cycle together.